But it is the vitriol, and it's the bigotry, and it's the aggression that underlies sometimes what is appropriate speech and sometimes what is inappropriate speech, which really should be the canary in the coal mine for us. You know, the canary in the coal mine is always that metaphor we use, that when the miners used to go down to the coal mines before they had the technology we still don't have today, they would bring canaries. And when the canaries would stop singing or chirping, it would tell them that, in fact, the oxygen in the coal mines had become too thin for human or animal existence. So it was an example of get out. When you begin to see this level of vicious bigotry, not just episodic, but organized, defended, not decried by even the political leadership of the Republican Party, the canaries in the coal mine are beginning to chirp a little more quietly. And we have to wonder about what the impact that would be on our democracy long term. Now, let's be clear. Politicians often pander to the worst instincts of those who are extremists. They try to take those they can't comfortably rely upon and bring them into their base. They take for granted a base that they know is going to be there regardless. And they often compromise what are core issues of principle for the sake of political expediency. The years since the civil rights victories of the 1960s exposed a very pernicious streak of bigotry and prejudice and violence in the American electorate. We did not make the progress today by relying upon public opinion. If we had relied upon public opinion, we never would have desegregated the nation's schools. If we had relied upon public opinion, women would never have been given the right to vote. That those hard-fought battles were only won because we had the political will and we had political leaders who were willing to make the hard decisions of what was best for the nation. Now we have political leaders who take public opinion polls and figure out what they should say based on what the public thinks. They would rather follow than lead. They will pander rather than ponder. And what is so disappointing about the context in which we're in is that so many of the very difficult issues that are before us require that older, established willingness to lead in very important ways. It's especially hard to talk about this in the current political context. We are living in a time of war. Wars are great for politicians. They use them to justify kidnapping and torture, indefinite detention, life sentences for minor crimes, the suspension of constitutional rights on a massive scale. Wars allow politicians to push through very large budgets that allow them to grant contracts to industries that may underwrite their campaigns later on, or even be populated with some of their former cronies. Wars also allow candidates to take the most extreme of rhetoric and portray those who disagree with them as simply un-American, as weak, or as out of touch. And the history of this approach of using war as a way to demonize those who oppose you is easy to trace. 1968, Richard Nixon. He campaigned for president using what some people call dog whistle phrases. Dog whistles, the type of whistles that when you blow on it, only a dog can hear, and it looks innocuous enough. But certain phrases that when you use those words, white bigoted voters can hear the whistle. They know exactly how that whistle sounds when you use words like law and order or activist judges. And when you plug on that whistle, most of us don't pay attention. We just say, okay, law and order, yeah, we're all for law and order, and activist judges, well, no more activists in the recent Supreme Court on the campaign finance case, but okay, we shouldn't like activist judges. But yet, it rallies around a group of individuals who will hear that whistle and take the cue as empowering them to unleash yet an even more destructive force in our democracy. You don't have to take my word for the origins of the cynical political ploy of trying to fuel white resentment and racism and xenophobia that's really apparent in today's Tea Party. You can really go back and look at the words of the first black chairman of the Republican Party, who told an interviewer, quote, "For the last 40 plus years, we had a Southern strategy that alienated minority voters by focusing on the white male vote in the South." That's exactly what they did. That was conscious. So by any means necessary to get the white male vote in the South, they would alienate minority voters and undercut basic rights and basic principles in ways that we have now seen. Ronald Reagan took the Southern strategy to a new level. He launched his general campaign in Mississippi. Now check this out. Governor from California. I didn't know this until I started researching for this speech. Governor of California. But it would have been perfect for him to launch his campaign in Hollywood. He would have had a lot of his boys and girls there. But he decided instead to go to a Mississippi county that is known in history for the murder of 3 civil rights workers. That's the county he picked. And he launched his campaign with the same states' rights rhetoric that was a lovely little dog whistle that the segregationists of the past remembered and embraced and saying, yeah, if we had state rights, we wouldn't have civil rights. I'm a state rights person. 8 years after that, Willie Horton, a black felon who raped and murdered a white woman on furlough from a Massachusetts prison, became a television commercial that doomed the presidential hopes of Michael Dukakis. The Republican message was crystal clear. Black and Latino people committed crimes, and Democrats let them. But then something really peculiar happened. The Democrats started taking notes, started taking off from the same playbook. 1992, Bill Clinton flew back from a campaign stop to oversee the execution of a mentally disabled black man in Arkansas, proving that Democrats could be tough on crime as well. In his 1994 State of the Union speech, Clinton endorsed a federal law that said 3 strikes, you're out, 3 misdemeanors, and we'll treat you like a convicted felon. Then George Bush used the 9/11 attacks to disguise a very naked power grab by the executive branch, calling his efforts to eliminate the Constitution's checks and balances as a war on terror. These seem like disparate events about how we deal with crime in America and how we deal with the war on terror. And yet so many of the lexicons, the strategies, the impact on core liberties are exactly the same. Even Barack Obama, when you go back and look at his statements as a candidate, would have to show his tough on crime bona fides in order for him to become president of the United States. He said, quote, "I have passed 150 pieces of legislation that toughen penalties for violent criminals." That was one of his campaign statements. And lamentably, when we look at his record over the last year and 3 months, he's continued some of the worst aspects of the Bush war on terror, where it's been a change in rhetoric, but not been a change in reality. I'll explain.